The Chelsea Hotel has a long and fascinating history. It has been home for writers, actors, artists, and poets. Some of the most famous people have lived there, and some of the strangest as well. Criminals, transients, and, reportedly, the supernatural. Many people believe that the Chelsea Hotel is one of the most haunted buildings in North America, a home to dozens of ghosts and spirits, perhaps even more. But in April of 1912, the Chelsea Hotel was home to a different group of people, a group of survivors from the Titanic. On April 14th at 11:40 p.m., the Titanic collided with an iceberg 375 miles south of Newfoundland. At 2:20 a.m., the ship broke apart and floundered with 1,000 passengers still on board. 2 hours later, the RMS Carpathia arrived on the scene and rescued 710 surviving passengers from one of the greatest marine disasters of all time. While those who did not survive were recovered and brought to Halifax for identification, those who did were brought to New York. And some of the survivors stayed at the Chelsea Hotel. The second-class passengers, to be specific, were brought there due to the hotel's proximity to the Chelsea Piers, which was the destination of the Carpathia after rescuing the passengers. The Chelsea was home to the survivors for several days, while they reunited with their loved ones and waited on the news from Halifax on the identities of those whose remains had been recovered. But legend has it that blending in with the survivors was someone who was also awaiting news, and like the passengers, she was experiencing shock and grief. But unlike the rest of the survivors, she would never leave the Chelsea Hotel. Her name was Mary. She was a young woman from Buffalo, New York. She had recently married, and her husband and his brother had traveled to England via a passenger ship to collect on a family inheritance. Instead of waiting in Buffalo for her husband's return, Mary decided to surprise him and travel to New York to meet him at the dock as he got off the ship. She arrived a few days before her husband's boat was due, so she checked herself into a suite on the 8th floor of the Chelsea Hotel. Mary would soon discover her husband's fate, because the vessel taking him to New York was the Titanic. On the morning of April 13th, 1912, the whole world learned that the unsinkable Titanic, the largest ship in the world, had collided with an iceberg and sunk to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Shock soon would give way to outrage as people learned that there were only 710 survivors out of the 1,317 passengers that were on board. Although there are conflicting reports online as to whether Mary lived on the 8th floor or the 5th floor, most of the information points to the 8th floor, including that of actor Michael Imperioli, who said that in celebrity ghost sightings, his encounter with Mary was on the 8th floor of the Chelsea Hotel while he was living there. Mary is most frequently encountered on the west side of the hallway under the archway, where the door to her apartment would have been while she was alive. But Mary does not welcome those who encounter her, as Emmy Award winner Michael Imperioli found out when an encounter with Mary resulted in Imperioli moving out of the Chelsea Hotel days later. Michael moved to the Chelsea in 1996, and he stayed in an apartment on the 8th floor. One evening, as he was returning home, he stepped off the elevator on the 8th floor and immediately noticed that the hallway lighting was dimmer than normal. Then, he heard grief-stricken crying in a woman's voice. Down at the far end of the hall, he could see a woman knelt over. She was dressed in a black dress that appeared as if it were from 100 years ago. Her shoulders were heaving from her powerful sobs, and the sound of her crying seemed to come not from the woman herself, but from all of the air surrounding him. As the words, "Are you okay?" left Michael's mouth, he was startled by a loud popping sound behind him. As he spun around, he saw that the hallway light directly above him had gone out, and the area surrounding him had gone completely dark. When he turned back to the woman, she was gone. Imperioli thought she must have been startled and quickly went into one of the apartments. Later, as Michael was having dinner with some of the other 8th-floor residents of the Chelsea, he told them of his experience in the hallway and described the woman and what she was wearing. One of the women sitting with him informed him that he had just met Mary, the ghostly widow of a man who perished when the Titanic sank. As she told him the story, Imperioli got cold chills all over his body, and the hair on the back of his neck stood up. He went back to his apartment that night, but Michael was so disturbed by his experience that he could not sleep at all. Within days, Michael Imperioli moved out of the Chelsea, never to return. To this day, anytime the Chelsea Hotel or the Titanic is mentioned, he thinks of Mary and his encounter with her on the 8th floor of the Chelsea, and he will continue to for the rest of his life. Well, that's all I have for you today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I want to thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and click that notification bell if you want to be informed every time I have a new upload. Thanks guys, I'll see you next time.